Today we are back with another lore video, still on the theme of the Unforgiven Successor chapters, so all of the cool secretive chapters that stem from the Dark Angels. And in this video, the winners of the poll that I did a couple of weeks ago over on the community page, they are going to be our focus, and I'm quite glad of that actually, because the Guardians of the Covenant were the chapter that won, and that is a chapter that, in my opinion, absolutely oozes style. I just absolutely love them. And honestly, whilst I will probably say this on most of the lore videos that we do for the Dark Angels, because I do love them all, but I have to say the Guardians of the Covenant, they may be one of my absolute favourite and the absolute best, just in terms of how they look. The Guardians of the Covenant forego the typical combinations of the green and bone and black that the Unforgiven tend to sport, and instead they have this really unique and incredibly cool, in my opinion, design of this plain silver armour and black pauldrons, and then in what is possibly the coolest design choice ever, instead of the regular white or cream coloured robes that most of the Unforgiven chapters wear, theirs is this dark crimson red. It really is just such a good colour combination, and it really does make the Guardians stand out even amongst the other Unforgiven chapters. So I am just a really big fan of their design and their scheme. The chapter itself does have a relatively simplistic design. Their insignia and heraldry is a pair of white crossed swords, and like other Unforgiven chapters, they have their company symbol on their right knee pad. Where they do differ slightly from the Dark Angels is their own inner circle equivalent. In addition to having those unique red robes, instead of being called the Inner Circle, they are known as the Secret Order, but they do keep that same knowledge about the fallen and the shame of the Dark Angels at the end of the heresy. What the Guardians of the Covenant are well known for is being extremely zealous in keeping the secrets of the fallen and purging any information or data that they consider to be heretical. And in the lore, there is actually a squad, it's called Squad Weisten, who are renowned throughout the entirety of the Unforgiven as being even more zealous in this approach. They will often burn entire libraries and tomes and volumes of books right in front of bewildered allies in some situations when they find such contraband after a battle, and it's to the extent that this squad in particular are known as the Tome Burners amongst other Unforgiven forces. So just this sheer relentless approach they take to purging any information or any heretical tomes or words that they find following a battle. In terms of the chapter itself, the Guardians of the Covenant, they are from an unknown founding, so we're not sure when or exactly why they were created. What we do know though is their homeworld, Mortica 7, is in the Segmentum Pacificus, and that is where most of their focus in terms of battles and crusades is. They tend to fight a lot around the Halo Stars and also the mysterious Veiled region, and what that means essentially is they have a lot of contact with Xenos enemies, from Orcs to Drukhari. They are even very well known for a campaign against a Xenos threat known as the Lilith, who ravaged across the sector and were stopped by the Guardians. This is actually one of their more famous actions, the Lilith incursion. It happened in the 41st millennium, and it was essentially a huge assault on an entire subsector of the Imperium in the Halo Stars, and the Guardians of the Covenant engaged them in battle and fought them off and essentially saved the entire subsector. Now, whether it's because they fight Xenos factions a lot or if there is some other hidden reason for it, the Guardians of the Covenant are also a little bit different compared to not only the Unforgiven, but a lot of other Space Marine chapters generally, in that they are a bit more caring about the regular Imperial citizens. Now, I'm not going to go out and say they are like the Salamanders or anything like that, but they do show a bit more compassion and respect for the citizens of the Imperium that they protect. And I do think personally that could be in part due to the hatred they have for all of those Xenos factions and races that they do have to deal with, and they really are, obsessed with trying to protect humanity. Whilst most of the Unforgiven chapters do follow this slightly monastic style in terms of their look and their feel in the lore, the Guardians also differ from them in some way in that they have a very stringent and strict monastic style. They are, of course, fully fledged warriors and they fight to defend the Imperium, but the Guardians of the Covenant, they devote as much time to studying and furthering their intellect and their arts. You know, they are required to learn scripts and books to help illuminate them and their knowledge of the Imperial truth, and they do all that as much as they actually train for war, which is a really interesting thing for a Space Marine chapter to be focused on. And if you like that very monastic knightly monk style for the Dark Angels, then the Guardians of the Covenant will be a chapter that you will absolutely love for their lore and their backstory. And one of the particular records that is of import to the Guardians of the Covenant is called the Record of Oblivion. This is one of their relics, and this is essentially a data slate which keeps a record of all of the various civilizations that have been destroyed by the Imperium, including, you know, Xenos races and factions, chaos cults and renegades and all that sort of thing. And on occasion, parts of this parchment are transcribed and given to Battle Brothers. They're almost in a way like mini oaths of moment, which they can then be taken as a token for that Battle Brother to help inspire them to deeds of valor in following battles. And as I said, that focus and that drive for learning and that quest for knowledge is almost considered as important as battle and combat drill. So each member of the chapter is expected to spend significant amounts of time either on their home world or on their various fortresses and bastions to help not only their own understanding of, you know, the Imperial truth, but also to expand the writings and the knowledge of the chapter and the Imperium further. So it's a very, very odd and in some ways very unique thing for a Space Marine chapter to really dive into and have such a vested interest in. They in a way almost have something of a word bearer's vibe. They are very, very zealous about that knowledge and that quest for truth. And whilst it sort of was perverted by the word bearers, for the Guardians of the Covenant, they do it in support of the Imperium and to further that Imperial truth and knowledge. And it's got to the extent that they actually have very good ties with the Adeptus Mechanicus because of that search for truth. The Admech are always on the hunt for new information and artifacts and that sort of thing. So having that relationship with the Guardians is quite an interesting one because most Unforgiven chapters don't really trust the Adeptus Mechanicus. So it's quite unique that the Guardians of the Covenant are so close with them and they have access to potentially some even more, you know, esoteric and mysterious weaponry and gear because of that closeness to the forces of the Mechanicus. For all that though, despite their focus on lore and learning, they are still very much a ferocious fighting force. They are still Space Marines, and the chapter has been involved in lots and lots of actions over the years. As I said, we don't know when the chapter was initially founded, but they have shown up in most of the major conflicts that the Unforgiven has been involved in recently. They were there during the Arcs of Omen campaigns. They showed up during the Siege of Fenris, which was a big part of the 7th edition campaign in 40k if you played back then. The Forlex Rescue is a notable campaign where they fought the undying forces of the Necrons and helped to fight them off to save the populace of Forlex. So they saved about 100,000 innocent civilians in the process. So that is clearly showing a bit more, not only their you know, desire and engagement to fight Xenos factions, but also their interest in protecting the innocent citizens of the Imperium. And then a bit more recently in 8th edition, the chapter was also involved in a battle called the Massacre of Darkmoor. This is where some Dark Angel successors, including the Guardians, the Consecrators, and the Angels of Vengeance, they were caught in a trap by Chaos after following some portents from their librarians, and they ended up being ambushed and attacked by this huge force of demons and Chaos Space Marines, and allegedly over 1,000 Loyalist Marines were caught in this trap and less than 100 of them survived. In quite an interesting twist, they were potentially, all of the Loyalist Unforgiven Marines that were caught in the trap, saved by none other than Cypher himself. He apparently made an appearance, and then when the Loyalist forces, the Unforgiven forces, found out about that, obviously all bets were off. They started chasing him down, and then he led them, as they were trying to track him down, perhaps purposefully, to a secret teleporter which enabled them to get to safety. So was he there to disrupt them and attack them, or was he there to get them to chase him as he knew they would, and then lead them to a place where they could escape to safety. So once again, Cypher making his presence known, being this, shadowy figure. You don't know whether he's on the Unforgiven side or not, but in tracking him down and trying to capture him, they inadvertently were able to get to safety. So those Marines of the Consecrators, the Guardians of the Covenant, and the Angels of Vengeance weren't entirely wiped out in this ambush, partially thanks to Cypher himself. Of course, like all the other Marine chapters, they do now include the modern Primaris Marines. The Guardians of the Covenant have fully embraced the Primaris Marines. They have proved themselves in combats such as the Battle of Heltopia in the 42nd millennium. The Guardians of the Covenant in this fight employed their intercessors to fend off the forces of chaos who were assaulting the hive city of Heltopia with an army of plague zombies. Once again, showing that the Guardians have a bit more concern about the innocence of the Imperium, trying to save them from this invasion of chaos, but also showing that it isn't just Xenos factions that this chapter go after. They will still defend the Imperium from any threat, whether that is Xenos to heretics to the forces of chaos. Being so firmly set in the Segmentum Pacificus, the Guardians of the Covenant, they do serve in the Death Watch, but it's quite a rarity. Being so distant from places like the Jericho Reach, they aren't all that often called up to fight for the Death Watch, but there is still evidence that they have joined them. There is allegedly some power armor which belongs to the Guardians of the Covenant still kept in the Halls of Glory that the Death Watch have to honor the fallen brothers that have served there. But then in terms of their actual named characters that we do know, we have got Master Himeus, who is a company master. He fought along the Dark Angels and fought alongside Azrael himself during the Siege of Fenris, whilst we know that the third company of the Guardians of the Covenant is led by Master Arven Nardeth. He was present during the assault on the Nachmund Rift, which is where the Imperial world of Sangua Terra was being besieged by Harkon Worldclaimer, who, as we all know, is the Herald of Abaddon. He was one of the senior commanders during that fight, and it is said that his tactical insight and knowledge was sought by all the other Astartes and their leaders as they fought alongside him during that engagement, just because of his, tactical mindset and the knowledge that he brought to that fight. So the Guardians of the Covenant are a very interesting, not just Unforgiven chapter, but also Space Marine chapter in general. They are very unique in that they have this dedication and focus on knowledge and this quest to learn more. They are so dedicated to expanding the Imperial truth and Imperial knowledge. They write it on scripts on their vehicles and on their armor, and they spend so much time, as I said, they spend as much time doing this as they do actually training for combat. It is a huge part of their sort of backstory and their interest, and having that sort of monastic, monkly vibe to them does set them apart, even amongst the Unforgiven, which, as I've said, do already have that slightly monastic feel to them. The fact that they are so close to factions like the Adeptus Mechanicus, who are usually looked upon with notorious suspicion by the Unforgiven, just makes them even more interesting to me. They are very much a chapter that stands alone even amongst the Unforgiven, but they are still very much dedicated sons of the Lion. They will help the Dark Angels and the other Unforgiven chapters whenever they are needed. Nachmund, the Siege of Fenris, everything like that, the Arcs of Omen, they have been there, they have shown up, and they have done everything they can to keep the Dark Angels' shame and their hidden secrets a secret. But they also have this other side of them that makes them much more interesting as an independent chapter, I think. And that really makes them exciting to me. If you want a chapter that is definitely a Dark Angel successor and has all of that hidden guilt and shame that is a big part of the Unforgiven backstory, but want something a bit more interesting and unique about them, these guys could very much be the chapter for you. On top of that, if you don't want to paint green or black or bone, then these guys also give you a really good chance to branch out from that. They've got such an interesting and cool color scheme. I love the gunmetal silver and the crimson red robes. I think it is just such a good combination, and it means if you are doing you know, a combined Unforgiven list and have a few different units from different chapters, if you do want to kind of just paint up a load of different units, they really do stand out and look interesting and eye-catching when they are next to other Unforgiven chapters. But that's going to be it for the Guardians of the Covenant. I'd love to know what you think about the chapter, and if you do have an army of them, you know, that you've created and painted up and built, have you invented your own stories or backstories or histories for them? I would love to know all of that. Let me know what you think of the chapter, what you think maybe some of their secrets and why they have this quest for knowledge. What is the reason for that? Is there a secret agenda? Why were they created in the first place? Because that is another thing we just don't know. So give me all of your thoughts and theories and conspiracies down in the comments below. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me. But until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.